Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are joined by youth worker, former teacher and Liberal Party education spokesman Charles Shaw to discuss his party's ideas for reforming English education. So join us as we explore who the Liberal Party are and what they stand for, the connections between education and youth work, and the Liberal Party's education proposals.
Live from York, this is The Late Late Show with Christopher Vowles on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
I'm so pleased that you can join us on the other side of an England football victory. Today you find me 2 days into my summer holiday, having just returned from a weekend of camping in the Yorkshire Dales, and a 9-year-old daughter who is developing her confidence of sleeping under canvas is coming along really well before she attends her first brownie camp in a tent later this summer. The last month has been a hectic one of marking end-of-year exams for Year 9 and Year 10 students, getting up to speed on the cohort of Year 13 students that I will be working with next year as head of year, finalising some tasks as a school governor, and tidying up classrooms before the summer close down. Is there any more satisfying feeling in the last week of the summer term than binning the piles of unwanted paperwork that multiply on classroom desks and in filing cabinets over the course of the year? Next year's timetables have all been worked out, arrangements for Sixth Form Results Day have been settled, and the colleagues who are finishing this year have been given a fitting send-off as they prepare for a new role elsewhere or, hopefully, a long and happy retirement. Having not signed up for any exam work this year, my marking pens have been locked away in a classroom drawer until August, and I can spend the next 8 weeks reading what I want to read rather than what I have to read. In the last few days, I've just finished Joseph Heller's chaotic war novel Catch-22, so still have a head full of absurd and semi-absurd lines from Yossarian, Colonel Cathcart, Major Major and others floating around. One particular passage that remains strongly in my mind after taking Year 9 through a series of war poems comes through Heller's narrator on the futility of war. Only a fraction of his countrymen would give up their lives to win it, that is the war, and it was not his ambition to be among them. To die or not to die, that was the question, and Clevinger grew limp trying to answer it. History did not demand Yossarian's premature demise. Justice could be satisfied without it. Progress did not hinge upon it. Victory did not depend upon it. That men would die was a matter of necessity. Which men would die, though, was a matter of circumstance, and Yossarian was willing to be the victim of anything but circumstance. But that was war. Just about all he could find in its favour was that it paid well and liberated children from the pernicious influence of their parents. This summer, I'm going to try and make time to tackle some of the classics that remain stuck on my to-read list, and it's now becoming quite a long list indeed. Alongside wrapping up the schoolwork for another year, I've been trying to follow the England football team's valiant attempts to crawl towards the final stages of Euro 24 without overexerting their forward line, or anyone else in the squad if the truth be told. A handful of Portugal games aside, it's been a bit of a dud of a tournament so far, really. I can't help but think that any tournament format that permits 3 qualifiers from groups composed of 4 teams hasn't really been properly thought through. There will be teams that make it through the group stage without a single victory to their name and with a goal difference no better than 0, a position that hardly seems to incentivise attacking football. I think the new phrase that describes this approach to progressing with what we used to call the beautiful game is tournament football. And this seems a wonderful euphemism that could equally apply to other areas of our national life. If you've been following the UK general election campaign and watched many of the televised debates, then you will almost certainly know what tournament campaigning looks like and sounds like. For the last few weeks, the standard of the public debate has been poor, with leaders talking over each other and past each other on a number of policy positions that remain embryonic or still unclear. The standard of some of the questioning from invited audience members has also been generally less than stellar. However, here at Teachers Talk Radio, the standard of debate has been much, much higher indeed. We've sent out multiple invitations to the major parties to put their spokespeople up for interviews with our hosts, and this morning I'm pleased to say we had contributions from the Labour Party, the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats, as well as the Conservative House of Lords. And tonight's guest comes from the Liberal Party. If you haven't heard Tom Rogers' interview with Labour Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, then I would recommend you give it a listen. Teachers Talk Radio followers have been telling us all month that they are deeply underwhelmed by the education offer being set before the voters by the major parties at this election. Writing to us on Twitter, Mrs. G Music observes, quote, "Hardly any thought has gone into education in any of the manifestos. It's such a disappointment." Emma Bumblebee agrees, or seems to agree, as she writes, "I feel hardly anything has been said apart from Gillian's false soundbites." Similarly, Lefties Vote Green wrote, "Usually vote Labour, but education policy is unconvincing. 36,000 teachers will be cancelled without measures to retain. Also very disappointed by the way they backtracked on the climate education bill." End quote. You have to wonder, don't you, why so few parties want to talk about education with those professionals charged with delivering it day in and day out in classrooms, seminar rooms and lecture halls up and down the country. Perhaps if the party officials caught up with this morning's Weekly Review manifesto show, they might even discover that some of these professionals have imaginative, ambitious and transformational policy ideas of their own. If you didn't catch this show earlier today, it would be well worth a listen. Some great sharing from Hannah and Paul gave our aspiring MPs an excellent opportunity to set out their education policies for our listeners. So look out for the catch-up link. But tonight I'm very pleased to introduce prospective parliamentary candidate for Lincoln, Charles Shaw, who will be talking to us about the Liberal Party's vision for education. So we'll be asking, who are the Liberal Party and what do they stand for? How do they see the relationship between education and the wider experiences of children and young people? And what policies would they like to see introduced to renew and improve our education system? Charles Shaw is the Liberal Party education spokesperson and a professional further education lecturer and youth and community worker who also has a corporate governance and business background. Educated at Manchester Polytechnic, now Manchester Met University, and Liverpool Polytechnic, now Liverpool John Moores University, and other colleges with strong links to Commonwealth countries. With a history in the College of Preceptors, he is a member of the Chartered College of Teaching and the Society of Teachers in Business Education and has worked and taught in London, Manchester, Oldham and Lincoln. Charles has played a leading role in shaping the Liberal Party's stated intention to deliver an education system for all based on greater devolution of power to communities, a new network of industry-focused training boards and a more effective inspection regime. And I'm delighted to say that Charles joins us on the line now. Good evening to you, Charles. And for the benefit of our younger listeners, could you please give us a brief outline of the Liberal Party's origins?
Right, I give you the Liberal... Yes, absolutely. For those who don't know, going back way time in history, the English political parties were split really between the landowning classes and the industrial and other classes. And at that time, people were elected as members of parliament, and I'm going back a couple of centuries and more, back even as far as the 1700s, where people were elected to parliament and actually they chose which group they affiliated to. Eventually, one group became called the Whigs, which was the generic, more industrial, working class plus other interests, as opposed to the landed gentry, which tended to veer towards the Conservative Party. And subsequently, the Whigs eventually, when merged with other interests, became the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party then became a major, one of the two major parties of government. And at the turn of the century, the 20th century, when we're talking, it was the major party of government. Subsequently, we got the growth of the Labour Party, and therefore we got three parties engaged in government. And I think that's what. Now, the history of it now is that the Liberal Party then, later on, as we all know, or most people know, had a flirt with the Social Democratic Party, which was founded by Labour members, and voted some parts of it to merge. So it merged, and that's how you got the Lib Dems. But the continuing Liberal Party continued with a considerable number of members and activists over and above the small group that were left in what is now the small SDP, and has certain areas of strength across the country.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So what distinguishes the Liberal Party's worldview then from that of the Liberal Democrats, whom our listeners may be more familiar with?
What distinguishes the Liberal Party's view? Look, it's quite interesting, really, because a large part of the plank of liberal politics had been about working with other countries. It's a large part of it that one thing I didn't mention in the history was that free trade and trading across the world was an important part of liberal policy. The removal of restrictions on that. And in terms of local government, locally, is in terms of more local autonomy. Now, you get that from all parties, but when the Liberal Party talks about federalism or localism, it means local. And one of the major things that happened in the merger with the SDP was the Liberal Party ran itself locally. It had some great successes locally, but things were run in a very clear federal thing. Now, other parties will talk about federal, but what actually happened after that merger was everything got centralised, and the theory of the local area being able to be its local party really was lost. Now, that strand also, the other thing that distinguishes it, but one of the parts of liberal history is quite interesting, because within the concepts and the strands of what we might call non-conformism in the UK, I'm just looking at whether I can see your thing on here, was that most of the traditions that we know of as non-conformists in the UK, particularly among social and community groups and campaigning groups and the churches, actually found their home in the Liberal Party as was. And in fact, Steve Radford, the current leader of the Liberal Party, would say that passion and that area of non-conformity runs through the whole of the party.
Thank you. So this sense of moving away from central control, do you think that's had any effect on the party's electoral history in recent years?
I don't think it really would have had, apart from the issues that I've just talked about merged parties. I think in very recent years, that was the long-term plank of the Liberal Party. I think in recent years, the difference has been that various things in the political setup and consensus, and of course you have to remember, Liberals are essentially pro-working with other countries and are essentially positive about Europe and positive about the Commonwealth. The difference is we may be positive about Europe, but we're not positive about the Treaty of Rome, and the underlying implications that were in that. So consequently, the Liberal Party was Eurosceptic. And the reality is that a large number of the things that attach to other parties, parties I don't really want to mention, like Reform, as well as the Liberal Democrats, basically, they enjoyed getting the money out of having people in Europe. And I have to say, very sadly, because I want it to be about wanting to serve people, help people, whatever, that was a major motivation for their involvement. Whereas what we're concerned about is the countries working together for peace. It's not about money. Money is important, but it's not just about greed. It is about peace and other things. So, but in terms of issues of success, you have to accept that whatever party, whatever group, when they suffer a setback or there's a merger or something else happens, they have to rework and regroup. But actually, in the areas where the local groups have remained strong, we have had successes. And that's definitely the case where in parts of North Yorkshire, parts of Devon and Cornwall, in parts of Liverpool, where in fact we actually succeed ahead of the Lib Dems and, hold council seats. And so I think it's given us an opportunity to look to those people who want to build a different sort of society to come and join.
Certainly interesting, isn't it? Because if we look at the two major political parties in England, everything seems to be moving more and more close to the centre. We see Conservative Central Office taking quite a significant control over who gets to stand where and which resources get deployed where in their election campaign. We've heard a similar story with the Labour Party. How does the Liberal Party go about ensuring that its resources are best directed at seats it can win when much of the onus on developing ideas and getting things going, in your view, seems to come from the grassroots up?
Obviously, as in all parties, central resources are pitched at trying to win certain areas. And I think we're just at the moment in the cusp of the position the Greens were before they got the one seat in Brighton, which is what they've got. And I think that, is quite possible with our position in Liverpool and some other areas. So we just don't know. So we are focused on those sort of efforts. However, fitting in completely with what I said, where there are people on the ground, where there are people who genuinely want to serve their community and want to stand, it doesn't matter whether it's in the local councils or it is in fact for Parliament or elsewhere, then we will back them. It obviously takes money, but obviously the cost of the deposit. It's down to whether it comes from the local people or whether it comes from central funding. But wherever people are able to contribute locally, then we let them go ahead. And I have to point out, there are a lot of people, I shouldn't criticise other parties, but of course who has the biggest subscription. It's good old Reform in terms of sign up with your back pocket. Well, as far as we're concerned, that back pocket isn't for us in the centre. That is for the local community. And therefore, where the local people want us and want a Liberal to stand, then I'm sure that will be sorted.
Yeah, it's interesting. This idea about community too is an interesting one for me particularly. I mean, you mentioned these areas of the country where you're putting much of your efforts, being North Devon, Devon, North Yorkshire, and then Liverpool, Merseyside area. Is there any kind of difference between the way liberalism is experienced in the largely rural areas of North Yorkshire and Devon? I'm a Devon native myself, and I live in North Yorkshire, as compared with the largely urban areas like Liverpool.
Well, quite truthfully, Christopher, the difference is how much legwork you've got to put in. If I say that, I actually used to campaign with a great Liberal MP, which was Richard Wainwright, who's now deceased, and was a friend of mine. And he tramped to the Saddleworth Hills, which was in the Colne Valley as well of Yorkshire, which was a really big piece of work. That's not to avoid your question. The issue is that in the area, the rural areas, obviously rural areas have other issues around, farming, transport, housing for people to stay in those communities and so on. But actually, those issues are a commonality, particularly with working class people in our big cities. The big difference, if you want to say, which we luckily don't have, maybe that's because we're not quite as big at the moment, but we have a mix of different types of people, is one of the most noticeable things in some of the, without talking about which party, but certainly parties with similar names, was that there used to be a northern working class alternative to Labour who were in Liberals, and a southern alternative to Conservatives. Now, it's not as simple as that, because if you're in Yorkshire, you know that Conservative means. And, there, in all parties, there are some very good MPs. And I take a risk here, a risk with my Liberal life, of saying that you have a very good MP who just happens to be Prime Minister and is at risk at the moment. And I don't mean his party, I just mean personally. Therefore, you've got a lot of issues there. But I think across the board, the issues that affect ordinary working families resonate across our different areas.
Thanks. I mean, I think you've partly hinted at this answer already, but how does a party with no members of parliament act to shape national policy debates? And I say that in full awareness that technically there are no members of parliament at the moment.
No, that's absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right there, and that's spot on, right? Because I actually think that this is a wonderful opportunity for me to tell your listeners where we fit in terms of the teaching profession as well, right? But what a relevance to this is that somebody said to me a bit ago in some event, this is just a member of the public as well, oh, you're just a pressure group. Well, really, all the trade unions are pressure groups, as well as representing their people in employment. I'm a proud member of the NEU, and we have lots of members there, of people who are actually in the Liberal Party. So, but also in terms of a party which doesn't particularly have MPs at that moment. And I have to tell you something here. There is a little travesty running through a theme. We have great politics. There's lots of things in our British establishment that we have to be proud of, and I'm not wishing to knock that down compared to other countries that may have some difficulties. But what I need to say is we do have a little national difficulty, and that is that the opportunity for individuals, working activists, local people to actually be involved and nominated into other bodies, not just parliamentary bodies, everything from drainage boards to national education forums to other things. Yes, people can come through unions, but for the smaller political parties to get their people there is quite a hard job. And certain key things, there isn't time to go into here, but which are historically, constitutionally, the gift within Parliament and the Prime Minister don't seem to extend very well to other parties. But having said that, people who are local councillors or local activists who get elected to other types of bodies and what have you can put forward the Liberal viewpoint. So it's not really a reason to say, oh, well, so-and-so hasn't got a particular member of Parliament. Because if you've got a lot of people in different spots around the country, then you are a powerful voice. And I was quite interested. I'm on a forum with prospective members of Parliament, other prospective members of Parliament, where somebody said, and people get ploughing the field of saying, I'm not a politician, whether they were Labour, Tory, Lib Dem, I'm not a politician, therefore you should vote for me because I'm an ordinary person. Well, as far as I was concerned, I better say this is all sort of cowpat rather than say something ruder. The truth of the matter is, if you put yourself forward for a public office of any sort that is elected, you are a politician, not a horrible politician, not a terrible one, a politician wanting to be on that, hopefully to do good. And therefore, we would say that's what we are. Members of the Liberal Party are politicians in that sense, and they do put themselves forward for a number of bodies. And it depends how you use what you've got. You could have 50 MPs and not really have much of a voice if you don't use it properly. So I would say our members work very hard in the interests of the communities they serve, and that's really how we gain our voice.
Yeah, so it's all taking part at the local level. It's about local action in local communities.
And national action. You know, I'm involved in some national bodies campaigning, particularly for things obviously in the education field and things in the youth service field. And I spend, you know, some time going down to Parliament regularly to meet people and lobby and discuss. And there are routes to do that, but you've actually got to do it.
Yeah.
That's it. And when you say about influence, I mean, I must say, we're glad to be talking to you today because we've just had some experiences which is quite interesting in terms of, dare I use the democracy word, where there have been hustings here and there. I've taken part in some hustings. I've got a big one in Lincoln Cathedral tomorrow night with the other candidates. But we've also had the situation where there's been more than 3 or 4 candidates, only the main 3 or 4 larger parties have actually been invited by the media, the BBC, to the hustings. And I can say that safely because I've actually got a reply from the BBC, which actually says, oh, we've had central instruction from BBC nationally to do this. So that means that people are not getting the opportunity to hear all the voices of the candidates. And I think we do have a systemic problem there that probably needs attention. And I'm sure it happens to unions as well. Right.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting point to make, I think, about the degree to which smaller parties are able to express their voice in the build-up to an election campaign. When you don't get to hear much from them outside of election campaign, it seems a bit harsh to squeeze them out during the election campaign.
Absolutely. And at the moment, we have to ask within that spaces that the BBC is giving for places, okay, they may have more candidates than some of us do, but the truth is, Reform doesn't have a single seat either, but it's been given a 4th voice. And that really is quite detrimental.
Yeah, that's been quite a significant cause of debate over the last couple of months, hasn't it? Actually, the degree to which the Reform Party's exposure has been amplified, perhaps beyond their deserts.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that useful overview of the Liberal mission, Charles. That should set the context nicely, I think, for the rest of the show, in which I'd like to explore your particular background in youth work and further education. And we'll be right back after this.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy4U, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Artificial intelligence is in the news after a study at a UK university conducted a real-life Turing test. The University of Reading published its findings in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. In the study, 33 alias student profiles were set up by the university's tech team. The alias students were all completing Bachelor of Science degrees in psychology across different years of study. The researchers helped the students to complete a range of exams and online assignments using unedited answers written by ChatGPT-4. Researchers found that 94% of their AI submissions slipped by the examiners unnoticed, and the AI students did better than their peers, with an 83.4% chance they could outperform a random selection of real student submissions. One of the study's authors said it should be a wake-up call for educators. A recent UNESCO survey found that less than 10% of schools worldwide have policies or guidance in place regarding generative AI. Further details of the study can be found in the PLOS ONE Science Journal. Middlesbrough Council East of England is to trial auto-enrolment for free school meals, according to the local government website. The pilot scheme will ensure automatic enrolment as a safety net for children whose families do not apply. Parents will have the right to opt out. The council said reasons for families not claiming free school meals included not understanding the application process, low levels of literacy, language barriers, and stigma. A sample of 60 Middlesbrough households found 11 eligible families were not signed up for free school meals, and the council said this meant schools missing out on thousands of pounds in funding. A similar process introduced in Sheffield in 2016 saw £3.8 million worth of extra pupil premium funding allocated as a result of auto-enrolment. The Star in Sheffield reports that universities in the city have launched litter patrols to reduce what they call end-of-term dumping. According to the article, enforcers will be out in force over the coming days as tenancies come to an end and 50,000 students move out of their rented accommodation. The joint approach by Sheffield and Hallam universities comes after residents complained about piles of rubbish left on pavements. Both universities have said that they work closely with the City Council and give regular reminders to students to put excess waste in bags neatly outside. A spokesperson went on to highlight that since 2013, students in Sheffield have raised over £1 million for the British Heart Foundation by donating items at the end of term rather than throwing them out. Schools Week reports that trusts are warning they face having to make significant redundancies and have no choice but to exclude vulnerable children following shock cuts to SEND budgets in the middle of the year. Multi-academy trusts have written to Norfolk County Council in a last-ditch bid to avoid a funding cliff edge, after learning last week how a revised approach to top-up funding would impact them. As first reported by Schools Week in January, Norfolk was not then on track to meet its government safety valve agreement. In January, it received £70 million to balance its high-needs budget, but was told to submit revised plans and to join an enhanced monitoring scheme. The Council has adjusted overall top-up funding allocations to remain within budget, but this means allocations will fall. The Council acknowledge it will create some challenges for schools. The letter, signed by the heads of 5 multi-academy trusts in the area, have revealed their shock and disappointment and stated it will result in significant redundancies. It goes on to say the effect on children will be negative in the extreme. The full article can be read on the Schools Week website. Finally, the BBC News website reports that Japanese Emperor Naruhito has returned to Oxford University as part of his state visit. The Emperor, then Crown Prince, attended Merton College, complete with security detail, during the early 1980s. A former roommate of the Emperor said he was very down to earth and didn't use a title, preferring to be called Hero whilst he completed his studies. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back to our show on the Liberal Party's education policy agenda with party education spokesperson Charles Shaw. In the first section of the show, we learnt about the Liberal Party's origins and its perspective on how communities might be supported in playing a fuller role in the decisions that affect them. Now we'll spend a bit of time, Charles, on your extensive experience in the youth work and further education sectors. Where did your personal interest in education and youth policy first emerge from?
If I was honest, it's hard to say what part of your development your interest in education policy comes. But I think, to give you a little bit of a background, I actually started like most young people originally, with lots of small jobs. My work with young people started when, like many teenagers, I disappeared to London at the age of about 16 and ended up working on an adventure playground. I'd already taken some exams then, some higher certificates as well as others, which I didn't realise as a teenager at the time were at the same level as A-level and would have admitted me to university anyway. So I actually went on to enter some myself independently and luckily added to the score. However, my experience in London and the communities which were around Westminster and around Kilburn, up the Harrow Road and so on, and working with young people there, although I wasn't much different to their age, was quite interesting. Sufficient for me to say I went back to Preston, where I come from, which is, of course, if I can say, to William Temple School, now Archbishop Temple School and all that, you know, the greatest cities in the country. I have to say that. However, I then went back to further work the following summer and then decided that my career would be in education and youth work, and therefore I went to Manchester Polytechnic, as it was then at that time. Now, during that time, I also felt that in terms of working with schools, I needed to beef up what I did, and I did the examinations of the College of Preceptors for Teachers, which really were very good at the time. And from that point on, I was strongly interested in the policy and the history of our education system, because I did detailed studies of the history of education as well. So my personal interest grew from that and from the very ground level work with young people in London. I can carry on with your other questions, or you can ask them to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what experience you had of some of the challenges that confront our teachers and learners during your teaching career.
Yes, I mean, I have the sort of advantage and disadvantage of having worked through the periods of different types of inspection systems, which we'll come on to later, I know, and the great initiatives that are formed in schools at different times. There's a lot of products and things. I'm going to make sure that I support some of the excellent products that are advertised through your website, but I must also point out that we've been through all sorts of things in changes in ideas, some of which were good and some of which were not. If anybody even remembers the old time when there used to be the fun about initial teaching alphabets and goodness knows what, and new learning and language systems. However, the challenges have always been around letting teachers get on with the job and letting them do the work in relation to the communities that are in. In the 70s to 80s, we built some fantastic schools and probably some more since, that with the focus on the community and getting the best out of the relationship between parents and teachers. But sometimes, far from people implying it's the schools that cause problems in that area, it's very often minor legislation and things that makes partnership difficult. I have to say that the relationship as we have now with academies and other things, there are excellent schools, but all academies are different. But I think involvement in the school, voluntary involvement by community, whether serving as governors or others, is really important. And I was quite interested. A head teacher who is just about to move on said to me recently, I have awful trouble attracting people as governors when I tell them they've no power, because this teacher is part of a much larger academy group of secondary schools, where he has to say to them, they can advise, but the ultimate board of the academy group will take the decisions. And really that fits in with my comments earlier about liberal philosophy. Do you really want to disempower people in that way? And can you expect young people to be disempowered? So one of the things I have seen is actually a growth of the talk about participation and involvement, coupled with measures which completely negate that. You're not participating unless you've really got a handle and a say. So that's quite interesting. Relationship between youth services and what have you. I think the challenges for me, because I'm embroiled in youth service as well, is how do we get youth services and schools to work well together? At the moment, there is a strategic problem in that youth work training originally used to run parallel to teacher training, as with the probationary periods and how people gained experience, and was based in people working in buildings. Now, to be truthful, schools are buildings. They're a community of learners and others that move forward. Youth work needs to be the same. We've lost the track between effective working in buildings with young people. And the Liberal Party is absolutely behind good youth facilities, being provided on or near schools. And unfortunately, the academy system has messed that up as well, I think we feel, because academies, particularly in the secondary schools, take over campuses that have youth buildings and decide they need them for something else, and the youth provision gets kicked out. So the relationship is really important. But what's fundamentally important is to understand that what young people do voluntarily over and above their compulsory school day really impacts on their growth and development. And so that area is certainly very important. The changes that need to be made need to make that happen. Now, I'm going to say something now, which will probably, what changes need to be made, might upset some teachers or some head teachers who have not really been brought up in this theory. The community element of schools, because what we're about in education is people achieving, people reaching their capabilities, people, obviously, yes, they get exam results, and that's really important to us, but we are about developing good citizens. It's about the personal development of every young person that goes through our schools and our youth centres and further education establishments. If we lose track of that, and I think we have lost track of that on a number of occasions, I'm not saying all teachers have lost track of that, but I certainly think the way that the education system has moved, it's in great danger of losing track of that sometimes. And I see fantastic work in schools, but where we look at, which is about the supposed results, and we all develop across our lives, the actual pushing of some things, not just in terms of exams, but the results that generally come out, is against the concept of lifelong learning for some people, and against the concept of the fact that people can develop at different rates. We've become too much packaged too much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on about that. Sorry.
So I was just going to ask you, Charles, where you think the gaps currently exist in youth services and schools. Where are the areas where the two sides aren't quite meeting in the middle?
Right. Well, the gaps are simple. The gaps are caused by an absolute fundamental thing, and this is something the Liberal Party would do. We would bring back absolute clarity on the education budget. And that would mean that local authorities and other areas had to have an education department. Not a mixed children's department now, as we have now, which includes the social care, the social work, and everything else. And admittedly, we've got the current structure because a lot of schools are outside local authority control. They don't have all to be in local authority control, and in fact, we're for an element of parental choice. But you need to know what budget you're going to get to support youth services centrally, and you need to know what budget a local authority has for schools. Ironically, with all the freedom of information, getting that information is quite difficult sometimes now. And we need to know that a designated part of the budget, education budget, that goes to local authorities and elsewhere, where it's actually set aside for youth provision. But
do we need a national list of different services that are provided by both sectors then?
Say that again, please.
Do we need a national list of where education stops, the line beyond which the responsibility ceases to be that of schools and begins to be that of youth services?
No, that's not what we're saying, right? Let me say that. In as much as that's not the element of control, there is obviously, and that's a misunderstanding about the concept of youth services, because youth services now have morphed into areas which are, because youth workers have particular skills, they've been used for many quasi-social work roles and targeted roles, and taking people out of face-to-face work with group work and young people in that sense. Teachers work with individuals. Teachers work with classes, which are clearly a large group. Youth workers need to work in informal education with groups in the community and in youth centres. That to have a demarcation line saying, right, young people at this age or whatever aren't part of the school system or whatever, is not what it's about. It's about what young people do, the leisure time needs of young people, and the things that they can voluntarily go to and be involved with over and above their daytime school policy, or if they've left school, it's their choice in another way. So it's not just about that demarcation line. Where we're saying a demarcation line is we need to know, we need a clear budget coming down to local areas and for youth services and services to young people, so that the plan, which is in the statutory guidance for youth services, which states a picture of adequate leisure time and informal education provision for young people in a community, in a particular town or county or whatever, is absolutely clear, and we can pinpoint where there are gaps and where there isn't provision. At the moment, that just doesn't happen. That is actually what's meant to be statutorily happening. There's only guidance the other year put through the National Youth Agency saying that, but it still doesn't happen. So to some extent, our youth work provision is very patchwork compared to our school provision.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the patchwork nature of it because, and again, it's interesting some of the other things you've said about school governance, because I currently serve as a school governor in my daughter's primary school. We've received notice that the school day needs to be extended with activities that children can do. Our school is so small, it's less than 56 children, that we don't think we can provide that on our own site and are having to enter into new partnership arrangements with other local primary schools. I just wonder how much time is going to be left in particularly a primary school child's day for informal education if we're insisting from the DFE that the school day should get longer and that the after-school club should be part of that standard school provision.
I think you certainly hit it on the head, obviously, there for that level of school, yeah, and for the primary group, and the partnership issue of partnership with other schools. I mean, I don't know your geographic area, but in terms of in urban areas where there are a number of primary provision, then maybe they can work together for something. In a rural area, as you asked me about rural areas, and you probably are, that's a little more difficult. The issue about the school day getting longer and the out-of-school clubs, it's where are we going with that? And what are we catering for? And what is, and who is staffing this? And how is that going to be worked out? It's a great concept that you can have extra provision on the school site, but obviously you've got to staff it, work out what's happening there, and how that fits in with parents' requirements.
Yeah, you're
I think
right.
the school day is long enough.
Where do you see it going in the future then? Do you see it running all the way up to 6:30?
No. I'm sorry. I said I shouldn't say an absolute no. Yeah. What I should actually say is, look, these things start and roll back. Yes.
Yeah.
And they impinge on other issues, which I know you've mentioned elsewhere, like about free school meals policies and things. But it depends what job we're doing. And I can see a lot of issues arising here with this, in the same way as issues arise around school support staff. Yeah, whereby the government, somebody has a good idea, and then you realise you've got to staff this, and which staff are going to do it, and where does it fit? I think
the schools have got to make it happen.
The school day can be too long for some of the young people. And of course, if you're just trying to solve another problem, like people who've got a work problem or a childcare problem, how much further are you going to go doing that? Really difficult, that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We've certainly seen, I think, over the last 2 years or so, the movement of more and more and more activities that when I was at school in the 1980s, we would have done in a separate institution or at a separate venue, completely divorced from our school setting. We see more and more kind of being wrapped into that school setting. I wonder if the school premises is being seen as the solution to virtually every single problem that comes our way in youth education.
Well, I mean, we would say that there's two things running there. One, we would say it's right that schools have their facilities open for appropriate community usage, yeah? But at the same time, you can't solve every problem, by that method, yeah? But we seem to have, there's an interesting thing here, because there was a time when the first thing to do to make the school more accessible was tear down the school railings. Now, what we've got now is every school saying, I don't know about your school, saying, well, actually, Ofsted says we have to have these 6'6" railings around the school.
Yeah, we just built one, a very, very, very expensive one.
Right. But we want you to run a lot of out of hours stuff as well. Yeah. So there's different conflicts running there, and that will go. I think that will go full circle. I think we'll get a set of different viewpoints in a number of years, where it will be seen that maybe that isn't the complete answer to security either, or the community involvement. So that's very interesting. I won't go so far as to mention A.S. Neil there, although I have done, who doesn't appear in school training anymore. Right?
My great uncle used to teach in his school actually a long, long time ago.
Oh, right. Well, that's
as
interesting.
An art teacher. In terms of staffing, which is an interesting point you raise, how do you think we make youth work and teaching more appealing as career options? Is youth work suffering a similar crisis of recruitment to the education sector?
It's suffering a recruitment. It's absolutely got a recruitment problem in terms of part-time staff. Yeah, because a lot of part-time staff are part-time in youth work. It's got a recruitment problem in full-time youth work as well, because it depends what job people think they're going to. Now, if you go to a school, to give you an example, if you went to a school and thought you were teaching, yeah, and found half of your school timetable you were not teaching, and you were doing multiple administrative and other tasks and what have you, and you had the strangest piece of work, yeah, as well as the same issues where people go into schools where pupils seem to be quite difficult, you might leave the teaching profession. If you go into youth work and believe you're actually going to be able to do face-to-face work with young people, and as happens now, half of it is taken up with paperwork, reports, the old administration tick the box thing, you'll have the same feeling. So we have people who go for so long into youth work, find that it is an overly bureaucratic and managerially led role, which they never even thought youth work would be, and leave. Now, you might say that is across society, but it isn't, because there are some excellent areas where youth work is carried out well, and they've sort of got the balance right. But I think it has to be appealing. People go into that area of work because they want to work with young people. But fundamentally, it has to find its way. In a way, we know that teaching's teaching. Youth work is an education profession. It's not the same as social work, but currently there is a government. Somehow we've got into a situation where people think where the problems finish with social work and care and families, they can stick youth workers in. Now,
I think that's quite an interesting point to think about there, actually, isn't it? When we think of the term youth services, perhaps many of us in wider society can often think of it as the sector that picks up the pieces of a young person's life when everything else has gone wrong. But that isn't really what we're talking about here, is it?
No, and that's where it absolutely fits with having adequate provision and adequate leisure time provision, because if there is good leisure time provision with competent youth workers, understanding adults who can, and well-trained adults who can work with young people, that actually reduces the number of young people who end up in the pick up the pieces box. And what we've done is we've created a situation where we don't provide a lot of normal things, but then things go wrong, and then suddenly, yes, it's that pick up the pieces job. Now it's great. It's great in terms of youth workers doing work, which then puts young people on the right track. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But youth work, if you said a school was just for the difficult young people, or put that in whatever phrase you want to use, that school would certainly get a label.
Yeah.
Whereas every school has to be a community of learning. And therefore, if you say, oh yeah, youth work is just about solving the naughty people, then youth work gets a label. And that's not what it's about. And it's to a great frustration of a lot of people who do great work in leisure time where young people come voluntarily to their activities. And yes, there are some difficult young people, but the great value of youth work, unlike, and that to that extent, it's a different educational model, but may fit with the classroom, was where you have a good atmosphere, when it is like a school, where you have a good atmosphere, where you've got the right mix, you can assimilate a few difficult people and move them to your atmosphere. If the difficult people become the majority, the work is very hard.
Yeah.
And therefore that is the educational task. So society is saying, oh yeah, the youth work, they can just all work with all the difficult people. It doesn't quite work. So there's a lot to go through there. But the important thing, I think, in terms of attracting people, is to make absolutely clear that it's an education profession. And I really hope that organisations like the NEU, because the Community and Youth Workers Union used to be a central association of NUT, but it's now went off into, I won't say which other unions or whatever, but it's sort of lost its way a bit. And the change to NEU, we really need to look at the whole education sector working together in the unions. Enough of that anyway.
I think that's a good point to wrap up this section of the show, Charles. It's really interesting, I think, to hear your perspective on the relationship between youth services and its different meanings and different contexts and schools. In the final section of the show, I'd like us to examine the Liberal Party's education agenda in a bit closer detail, looking at perhaps some of the policies that the party advocates for our children and young people as we look forward to the lifetime of the next Parliament. So I think we'll consider what a reformed comprehensive system might look like, perhaps think about how the inspection system needs to change, and ask where the party currently stands on some of the debates that have dominated the education discussion since the beginning of this academic year. And we'll be right back after this.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy4U, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
Welcome back to the final part of our show on the Liberal Party's education agenda with prospective parliamentary candidate Charles Shaw. So far, we've learnt about the Liberal Party's history and heard about Charles's considerable experience in coordinating youth services and forging connections between the voluntary sector and mainstream education. In the final part of the show, we will look at the education policies the Liberal Party believe our children and young people need government to deliver in the lifetime of the next Parliament. So let's begin then, Charles, with the party's policy on comprehensive education. The Liberal Party are committed to developing a community comprehensive school system. What might this look like, and how might this improve the educational experience for all students?
Right, well, yes, the Liberal Party are absolutely committed to the comprehensive model, and really the problem, as with many models, and it actually almost answers some of the questions that you've asked about issues for teachers as well. The original plan for comprehensive education in 1965, we believe, was a reasonable plan and the way to work. And this was partially implemented, and as many people will say, there were supposed to be reversals in the Thatcher era, but we continue to implement the comprehensive system because that had started in certain areas. Subsequently, what we have done is divert it and mess it up with the academy process. I have to ask you, I'm sorry to do this on a broadcast, but I have to ask someone to be quiet. I must have been, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
Right. I must have been a very bad teacher then, because I just told someone to shut up. Right.
No.
But I thought you might like that. I thought that might add some value to your broadcast. But in reality, what we want is a comprehensive system in each area fully finished off and completed, preferably without the academy backup, but where comprehensive schools were local community schools. And yes, we have to accept, because we accept an element of parental choice, so people will move around and pick where they go. But the essential components of the comprehensive system, obviously no selection at 11 in examination terms, and also a big plank of our policy, which would have implications over a period of time, would be throughout the whole thread of Liberal policy, and not because we're a smaller party at the moment, but we don't believe big is beautiful. Big is it might be beautiful on occasion, but it's generally speaking, the trend, whether it's in education, colleges, or whether it's in the health service or anywhere else, the trend towards larger units really has to stop. And we have destroyed so many good community comprehensive schools by closures and mergers. We've not destroyed everything, because we have good teachers working in the other institutions, but a lot of it's been unnecessary and short-sighted. And one of the things that does impact on teachers, as in any professionals in this sense, is short-termism. I had to deliver a talk to a university, funnily enough in Bulgaria, where I was competing with lecturers from Germany and elsewhere. And I had to say that I thought Britain was the best at short-termism, that we cornered the market, because we really do change our policies instead of letting things embed. And that really is to the detriment both of the teaching profession and to children. Now, there are different views on the comprehensive school system. For me, I'm personally, so it's not party policy completely, but my view is that the 11 to 16 model is best, because it allows the pupils at the age of 14, 15 and 16 to take more responsibility, instead of being in a school where the 16, 17, 18-year-olds are the ones who are seen as the ones taking responsibility. They can do that elsewhere in a sixth form college or whatever. Now, not every teacher will agree with me on that one. So, but it doesn't matter whether it's an all through to 18 or through to 16.
So if we think about the system as it is then, Charles, if we think about how the system as it is now, how would you want to move the system towards this new comprehensive system for all? What steps need to be taken to make sure we're not left with a sudden change again in the future?
Right. Well, the steps we would want, essentially, would be an immediate stop to the growth of giant, large schools and mergers. So mergers where we come along and we say these two schools or three schools of 6 to 1,000 pupils will be merged, all that would be removed, would not happen. And to embed that would be also the situation where the governance of those schools was embedded in the community that they serve. So the governance situation would be different. There wouldn't be academies. They could be self-run, but that would ensure it's in those communities. And time again, there have been situations where a community has been against a large merger, but it's gone ahead because a community has very little power to stop a change in its schools. And I've seen teachers and counsellors sitting there crying at meetings because simply somebody in a department or an academy has said, this is happening. And we need a situation where the local community votes on what's happening, not a situation which is really removed from the community. So we'd have to build something in to make that happen, but we wouldn't necessarily overnight change the schools as they are now, because if they're running well, you let those run well, and then you assess the larger units to see whether they're still fit for purpose over time. But the big problem is the change. Schools work hard, teachers work hard to create a good atmosphere for their school, and then they have to go back to the beginning. And that's just the same as the model where we all used to say, a bad head can ruin what a good head has done in a matter of days or whatever it is. But what we don't want to be. Yeah.
And if we think about how that fits into the inspection system as well, because of course many of these academisation moves are forced by a bad Ofsted report, essentially. What is your position on Ofsted? Does it need reform or abolition?
The Liberal Party's immediate official position in our policy document is the need for significant reform, in detail. But actually, we're morphing very quickly because we agree with the NEU into just abolish it, right? It just needs to go. And you might say, well, what would you replace that with? Well, we have to say that the inspection regime before Ofsted wasn't that bad, right? And you do need the gentle guidance of experienced teaching professionals looking at schools. You can have a separate independent element to the inspection, but that has to come, we think, from that community. And that is quite different to appointing other people as independent examiners who, yes, may learn over time, but really don't understand the dynamics of what's needed in schools. So Ofsted, would have to go, I think. And that's what I'll continue to campaign for.
Excellent. And in terms of accountability, how would the accountability system work within that new regime, do you think?
Well, let's be absolutely clear. There is no accountability with Ofsted. It's a post office disaster in waiting. So in terms of it, there's an accountability to a single core chief HMI and this, that and the other, right? But the accountability is to the ministry, is to the government. We're not saying there wouldn't be some HMIs in the system as such, but in terms of the accountability in real terms, for what's going on isn't there, is our view. It's just not a system. The only accountability is just, if you're saying the accountability for public funding and schools as to what their standards are, then that's different. If that's what question you were really asking me, it's quite simply the accountability is to the community and through HMIs and peer professionals or peer teachers. It's not impossible for a community to look at whether it's getting a good school, just depending on what it sets its targets at, and it depends what your emphasis is on. So that might sound woolly, but it's no more woolly than a tick box system that means nothing.
Yeah, even if a new framework was introduced, you'd need to have some thinking about what that framework contained, and there might be some serious questions about what you chuck out from the existing one.
Yes, and I think that there's one thing we've lost, one thing we talk about a lot in systems and education, and we talk about certainly a lot in other professions, is non-managerial supervision. The professional exchange of views that helps practice grow better. But actually, we've lost so much of that. What we think of in the word supervision is A telling B what to do. And we've got a problem there, because that's not how it should be with professionals. It does mean you do have some element of line management, but in terms of professionals, it should be them talking about, sharing about what they can do to improve the delivery, in this case, for the students.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask about a cause that's particularly close to my heart, which is free school meals. I understand your party supports free school meals for all children of parents in receipt of welfare benefits. How might this work, do you think? Would this not further blur the line between education and welfare, which we've kind of been treading earlier on in the show?
It might. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, and I must give you the view, because some of the policy now, be quite open about this, is being rewritten. By the time we come to our October Assembly, yeah, there will be some changes coming, I know. In terms of the free school meals, at the moment, we support free school meals for all children of parents in receipt of welfare benefits. How might this work? Well, actually, I think we're moving to free school meals for all. I think we're moving. It
certainly simplifies the bureaucracy, doesn't it?
Yes, there are a number of areas. I mean, the classic example, it's not school meals, but the classic example was the area where there was something where there used to be laundry and other things in Liverpool, where in fact they worked out to provide the service free, cost them less money than charging various small amounts. In terms of school meals, we're going to say, why are we doing school meals? Well, of course, thanks to Mrs. Thatcher's time and before, we completely lost track of why meals are provided in schools. Meals are provided so that the young person or whatever gets some appropriate nourishment in the middle of the day, or whatever other time you do it, right? But it's there for a reason. It's about nutrition, and health. And therefore, on that basis, it should be part of the whole thing in the school. I think in terms of free school meals, it would be administratively easier to operate, and it would also balance out against the other issues of welfare, in that you were known that there was that target for a young person to get that meal. The question is, what types of meals are we providing? Are we providing a meal, or are we providing a sandwich and a packet of crisps? So that there's a whole other agenda.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of work to do there, wouldn't there? I think we need more than a few celebrities coming in. I think it needs a fundamental overhaul, really, what we think we put into school dinners. And one would imagine you'd be able to serve higher quality nutritional food if you were catering for bigger numbers at scale.
Yes, I think also, though, one of the things on the agenda, certainly for secondary schools, for us, would also be about education in whether we want to call it cookery, whether we want to call it master chef, whether we want to call it home economics, whatever we want to have as our current phrase. I think the ability to cook should be on the agenda for most pupils.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's more space. Well, there's certainly a need for it. Whether there's more space for it in the school curriculum, I don't know. There's one particular policy I was very interested to see, because it's one that's been circulating around for a number of years and no party has really taken it up, from what I can tell, apart from yours. Your party's proposed introducing a single exam board for GCSEs, A-levels, and I think degrees. We certainly know that in Northern Ireland they have one exam board for GCSEs and A-levels. How would this work, do you think, and why do we need this approach?
I have to say, this is a proposal from the grassroots of the membership, to the to our assembly, which actually, it is because of their confusion about different exam boards, but it stayed with us, this policy, for a while. That's the view. It is up for debate because and that's not making an excuse for it. It's that it would only be sensible if it meant that there was a reasonable modicum of standard throughout all GCSEs, and it was simplified, and more effective. I think this is up for debate.
It's interesting, isn't it?
I absolutely have to be honest and say I think we've got it up for debate.
It's interesting. I could see it working if you had. I mean, I teach English, so if we if we were to think about a subject like English literature or history, where there's a vast range of content that a board could choose to set, you could have single boards offering different syllabuses within their same subject. In English literature at A-level, AQA, for instance, have an A syllabus for literature and a B syllabus for literature. They're quite different, and schools have to do a bit of retraining of their staff if they shift between them. But obviously the results are coming back to the same essentially oversight in terms of grades and grade proportions. Is that where that is coming from? Is it about fairness in awarding grades equally across England?
It's clearly coming from the belief that of wanting to be a fair standard across the country. Yeah. We all know how the systems of marking work. Well, in different exam boards. But it's parents, this comes from the market, from parents not fully understanding why there are all these different boards. It really is, I have to say, Chris, up for discussion at the moment.
Okay.
The degree bit in terms of higher education, I must comment on, that you mentioned, yeah? And that is quite simply, question mark. That is up for discussion too. And the question mark is, do we have bodies? Are we just copying systems elsewhere of centralisation, accreditation of universities? Or should we really just call a halt at that point and say people just have to value where people have come from and hope, there's a limit to this centralisation. We used to have the Council for National Academic Awards, which of course awarded the degrees outside the universities before we made all the polytechnics and other things universities. And the thought was then that we'd have one body, but it didn't come about. But now, if you've got things will change. I think it's best for universities to try and work on getting their own reputation for quality. That's an element of competition that's not too bad.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I wonder how your members feel about perhaps that tension between centralisation of standards and community-based experience, whether there's any kind of contradiction in their minds, perhaps, between those two different things.
Well, there will absolutely be a contradiction and part of the argument. I think what we have to do is concentrate on the quality of experience and individual teaching. So this is a thing for teachers, yeah? And concentrate on making those opportunities the best, rather than coming up with more central administrative systems.
Yeah. Okay, Charles, I've got time to ask you a few quick-fire questions, if that's all right, about some of the policies that we've heard from elsewhere, just to get the Liberal Party's view on that. Is Labour right to advocate scrapping the current VAT exemption on private school fees, in the Liberal Party's view?
No.
Why is that?
Because VAT itself ought to go.
Okay, thank you. I think we're quite clear on that one.
We were Eurosceptic. We've not carried it out completely. VAT, the point is, it's either education or it's not education. It's got to be a level playing field, right? There may be questions about how the fees work and what have you, but it will not bring in anyway what people think it will bring in revenue.
Okay. Next one then. Do we need to ban mobile phones in schools, Charles?
In schools, yes.
And why yes?
Well, no. The thing is, mobile phones, question mark. Mobile phones in lessons, definitely. Yeah. How they work in between lessons or at another time, but really they should be handed in and then collected. It is complicated, but only complicated to the extent that amazingly, there were schools at one time that had coin-operated phones. In other words, young people may have a need for a telephone. Yeah, I think that there's a whole issue of trust around here, around this. The truth is, secondary schools and above, comprehensive schools and above, maybe some phones, but the phones clearly don't need to be on in lessons. Yes.
Okay.
They are another process But we're not against the technology at all.
No.
It just seems a nuts thing that's going on.
Yeah, just the use of it in the right circumstances.
Yeah.
2 more questions then for you before we have to wrap up, I'm afraid, for tonight. Should we be looking to create a generation of non-smokers by progressively raising the legal age for buying tobacco and vaping products?
No. I think we should just say continue with the no smoking areas that we have. Yeah. Educate people not to smoke. Draw an absolute and the dangers in vaping products. There are significant dangers with vaping products, both to the individual's health and to the community. And we just created a whole extra load of waste. Yes, there are going to be some real problems that build up there. But yes, continue with education around those areas.
Good.
I think that's as far as we go on that one.
Good. My final one to you tonight then. Would there be a place for state-funded faith schools in a liberal Britain?
As we have now?
Yes.
Look, schools, there's a strong tradition of schools connected to faith things, whether they're Church of England, Roman Catholic, something else, or whether they are Muslim schools or something. So the answer is yes, there is a place.
Excellent. Well, there's some very, very direct answers to some very, very direct questions, Charles. So thank you very much for that. I think it's clear to our listeners where the Liberal Party stands on some of the issues that matter to our teachers and young people, as we've heard this evening. It's also apparent that whichever party forms the next government in under a week's time will be appointing an education secretary who will quickly need to get on top of quite a bulging red box by the sound of it. So thank you very much for your contributions tonight, Charles, and we will look forward to seeing the constituencies declare on the 4th of July.
Yes, and whatever happens, we will centrally, we're on the web, happy to hear from any teachers who want to contact us.
Brilliant. Well, I wish you all the best of luck in your campaign, and we will look out for your result on Lincoln when the results come rolling in. Thanks very much again, Charles. It's been great to talk to you tonight.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Empowering education with Easy4U, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.com. easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk.
So, dear listener, we have reached the end of another Sunday Late Show. I hope you found this evening's show enlightening and thought-provoking, and that you now have a clearer picture of what education policy might look like beyond the manifestos of the big three national parties. Charles Shaw is standing in the constituency of Lincoln, of course, which has quite a large field of candidates in this election. The full list of other candidates comprises Laura Victoria Ashby, Independent, Hamish Falconer, Labour, Sally Ann Horscroft, Green, Craig Marshall, SDP, Carl McCartney, Conservative, Jamie Lee Macmillan, Reform, Linda Richardson, Workers' Party of Great Britain, and Claire Smalley, Liberal Democrats. It's now just 4 days until polling day, so drop us a message on Twitter to let us know how you think the party's education offer to the British people is shaping up. What more do the parties need to do to ensure that the younger generation are ready for the future that awaits them as citizens and electors? We'd love to hear your ideas for schools, colleges and young people, and your thoughts on what DfE circulars we might expect to be hitting school leaders' inboxes in August. Thanks again to Charles Shaw for tonight's show, and thanks to everyone who has tuned in tonight. Do check out our other Teachers Talk radio shows this week. We have a number of new hosts continuing to make their debuts, so look up the schedule on the website and give them a listen if you can. I'm sure they'd appreciate your support and in-show text messages. You can hear Tom Rogers exploring the implications of this election for education policy with a panel of outside experts and teachers on The Late Show at 7:30 p.m. tomorrow evening. Alternatively, Adam Colbeck is casting his eye over the implementation of instructional coaching with psychology teacher Paul Klein at 6 p.m. on Monday. Or, if you would like the inside track on how life works in a dedicated SEND school, then you'll want to stay up for Ray's Late Show with Stuart Hutchinson at 10 p.m. tomorrow. This week and every week on Teachers Talk Radio, there is simply so much excellent content to emerge with from real teachers working with real students in real schools. You can find anything you've missed on the 2,500 shows so far at www.ttradio.org. And if you have something you want to say or ask others about education anywhere on planet Earth, then perhaps you should consider applying to join the station as a show host. We are always on the lookout for those with current or recent experience of the classroom and other less familiar educational settings. Full details can be found on the website. That's all from me for this evening, so thank you for listening. I wish you a restful summer holiday when it comes. I'm taking a short break myself in July, but we will speak again in August. So, goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.